Welcome to Bat Therapy, psychology of Batman, superheroes, and other comic book characters. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We are your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources.
But this is something that I have been bothered with for a while. Let's talk about Thor.
Let's talk about Thor.
I really hate what he went through and how they handled it. All right, so I'm gonna just go and backtrack here and let me know if I miss anything here.
Okay.
All right. So first movie, he gets banished to Earth. He loses all of it. He loses his powers. He gets banished to Earth. Right. First movie.
Yep.
He also gets betrayed by his brother. Right.
Yep.
Second movie, he loses his mother. In the Avengers, of course, he's fighting against his brother. He does make a lot of friends along the way. He meets Captain America. He meets Tony. He makes friends, but he is still fighting against his brother.
Yep.
Thor 3 comes around. He loses his father and all of his friends and half of his people.
Oh, and surprise, it's due to his secret sister.
Due to his secret sister, right? Half of his people, at least, though, managed to get on a ship.
Oh, this is the worst part, in my opinion.
Right? And so everything's good. Half of them are on the ship. Now he's leading his people with his brother next to him, who he's reconciled with. And one of his best friends, Idris Elba's character. Right? Then immediately, that ship gets attacked by Thanos. More of his people die. His brother dies.
We're pretty sure.
He also lost an eye in there somewhere.
I think the sister took the eye.
Yes. Yeah, he did lose he lost an eye. Yeah. So, yeah, Loki died. This one that actually did.
Right. Because later on, that's a different multiverse Loki, right?
Right. Yeah. And he's like, okay, I'm going to get revenge on this guy that killed all my people, that did all of these horrible things. Loses that battle. Half the people on the planet disappear.
The entire existence.
Universe.
Half of everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he ends up gaining weight. He turns to alcohol and video games and like a lot of self-loathing. And then how does the universe react to it 5 years later? It's all fat jokes and laughing at him, picking at him. And I just think he deserved better. Not to mention that even after he got a chance to correct everything and he got a chance and they did actually beat Thanos and bring everyone back, he still lost his two original friends. Tony still died. Captain America left.
Yep, he peaced out.
Right? The Guardians of the Galaxy left him later on. Right? The Guardians of the Galaxy ended up leaving him later on, too. His girlfriend broke up with him, came back, and then died.
Yeah.
Oh, Agent Coulson. He loved Agent Coulson as well. He never did find out that Coulson was still alive. That happened as well. And so Thor has taken loss after loss after loss. And honestly, if you ask me, I feel like he handled it better than most.
Oh, yeah.
Especially with not really having anyone. Tony had Pepper to fall back on when everybody disappeared, right?
Yeah. And
Cap,
created a whole life for himself.
yeah, Cap and Natasha, they went and they were bouncing stuff off each other. Cap was going to support groups and everything, right?
Yeah.
Hawkeye straight up went and became the Punisher. He just went on a murder spree,
Yeah, Hawkeye, he went a
right?
different route than everyone else.
He went on a
Yeah.
murder spree. And so Thor didn't really have much. He didn't have a lot of as far as the support system goes. Like he had the kind of like goofball friends and stuff, but he didn't have anyone that he could actually lean on. And I just hate that. And I take it back. He did have people he could have leaned on, but he didn't. And at the same time, I just really hate that after all of this, he just gets fat shamed. Like, and it just
So
doesn't stop.
so here's the thing with Thor. So you and I, before we recorded, we talked about watching the Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. I ended up actually watching some Love and Thunder as well, and skipped around Ragnarok just to remind myself of some stuff there. Uh, Love and Thunder, while not as good as Ragnarok by any means, I don't think anyone would argue against what I'm saying here. He does talk a little bit about how things got to where they did in
Mhm.
Endgame.
Okay.
And so Tessa Thompson's character, the Valkyrie, I forget her name, but uh she so I feel like she would have been a really perfect person for him to connect with, to rely on. I think she would have loved that too, because she was taking
Mhm.
over leading the people. So I think that there were some people that were there. He just wasn't able to access them because of everything going on internally. And in Love and Thunder, he actually admits that he was keeping himself separate from people because he just couldn't handle more loss.
Mhm.
And so I think that there were opportunities for him, but it's also extremely understandable that he was keeping himself separate from that. He was just feeling so much he couldn't handle anymore, and it was coming from every angle. He just naturally withdrew. This is something that I think a lot of people can relate to.
Yeah.
So that's that piece. Now let's talk about Fat Thor. I think is how he's coined.
Yeah.
Um, so okay, it is very normal for someone to go through a lot of stress or a lot of loss or a lot of depression, which it definitely seems like he's dealing with, or a lot of substance use, for one reason or another. And I mean, there are tons of other reasons, but to gain weight. In fact, when it comes to depression, people can have weight loss or weight gain as one of their symptoms.
Right.
And so there are some characters who, if you pay attention, try and check in on them a little bit. I want to say, who's Tony Stark's best friend?
Rhodey.
Um, Rhodey. I think he checked in on him a little bit. So there are a few people here and there, but the major theme is definitely jokes. And so I don't fully know why, but when it comes to weight, that definitely seems to be one of the areas that we still feel like jokes are perfectly fine to free flow with. Um, and I'm not a fan of that.
And
Uh,
I wonder. So here's the thing about weight that I I feel like it's because in a lot of people's eyes, it's something that someone deliberately chose to do.
mm,
Like, oh,
yeah,
you started eating that, you did that to yourself, and it's fair play
right.
because, and that's how they look at it. Like, this could have been prevented, but you did this to yourself. Like, it, and it's But at the same time, and because weight loss happens for so many different reasons, and honestly, it's none of our business why, right? Because
Weight
it can
loss, weight gain.
weight gain, weight loss, right? Because
Mhm.
people can take certain medications that can cause them to gain weight. Like you said,
True.
people can have mental health struggles that cause them
Yeah.
to lose and gain weight. It's all kinds
It's
of
a lot of
things.
genetic and biological things that a person has
Yes.
no control
Yes, there's
over.
a laundry list of things that can cause this, but I think it's still one of those things. It's looked at as it's not looked at as something where it's unfortunate. It's looked at as look what you did to yourself.
Or even, I think sometimes it can be an unfortunate thing. So in Thor's case, for example, it's a visible representation of everything he's going through.
Hmm.
In other cases, people are naturally at different weights. People are naturally different shapes and sizes and all sorts of things. And so sometimes it's just who a person is.
Right.
They happen to be someone who is a larger size. In his case, I mean, there's obviously this drastic change that happened, and I think where the opening felt okay maybe was because, well, he's supposed to be this fit god, and so, oh my god, how would this happen?
Right.
But it is interesting, and I have a question for you. Does it bother you solely because, hey, we shouldn't be fat shaming somebody, or does it also bother? I'm I'm It feels realistic to me. Like, it didn't feel like this is a every now and then, like, the movies do their shticks, right?
Hmm.
But to me, it actually felt kinda realistic given the relationships and everything going on. It didn't strike me as strange, who was telling the jokes and where the jokes came up and how they happened. To me, it
Right.
almost felt like, yeah, this might have actually been what would happen if this were real.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And this is something else too, because I know we talked about like who Thor could have leaned on. And you did mention Valkyrie, and she is a good one. But besides her, no one else really knows how he feels because
Mm, yeah,
everyone he lost, he had for thousands of years.
very good point.
That's something that's also really bad. Like it's not one of those things like he lost this person of 25 that he known for 25 years. He knew these
Yeah,
people for
yeah,
millennia, and his world was great for millennia.
yeah,
And then all of this happened.
yeah. So let's talk about this. Okay, so he's very limited in who can support him in his life.
Hmm.
Well, we're in mental health awareness month. Let's talk about what if his friends, instead of making jokes, had actually maybe recognized something and helped Thor get some help. So like so so here's I think you're hitting on some really great things. So with Thor, you have all of this family history that you had no idea about, and is all of a sudden it rips everything wide open and literally destroys everything, the secrecy and how things were before he was born. It all comes back with his sister, and there's death and destruction, and then more of his people die, and then here he is going into battle. He was built for battle. Uh he is the god of thunder. He's a literal god,
Right.
and he wasn't able to do what needed to be done to
Do a thing.
save everybody. And so here it all cascades, it all happens all over again. It makes sense. It makes sense that he's struggling with this. And honestly, this would be a really great place for some treatment. It doesn't ever come up in all of this, and honestly, that's also really realistic. Um, I think especially for like, as you know, I work with veterans. So people who have been trained for military, for war, for battle, you are used to pushing yourself to the limits to get done whatever you're supposed to get done. So you were talking about, hey, we look at people as, look what you did to your body. You chose that route, even though it's not that simple. Same sort of thing for everything in life can happen with a warrior, where I I can do anything as long as I push myself hard enough. And if I bend and I break, fine, as long as whatever needs to happen happens.
Mhm.
But he failed. And his mom, even in was it Endgame, when
Mhm.
he goes back and sees her, she talks about failure, which was great. And you could see how much that hit struck a chord with him. But yeah, he's trying to deal with and process a lot of things. And it definitely looks like he's probably got some depression going
Oh,
on.
yeah.
With the weight gain, he withdraws. He really seems to not be getting any joy or pleasure out of the everyday things that he normally would enjoy. His mood definitely seems really low. Um, I mean, they make it very clear that he's drinking his way through life at that point. Um, there's a lot of stuff that he could maybe use some help with. And I don't know. It would be really interesting if you could actually, some people are using AI for this these days. Like, write up a different ending. Like, what if Avengers Endgame, someone had suggested Thor get mental health treatment? What would have happened?
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those things. I look at it and I say, when should he have sat down with someone? Like, at what moment should he have sat down with someone? Honestly, in my mind, it probably should have been after he had to fight his brother. Like, that would have probably been the first time.
Oh, you mean the first Avengers movie?
Yeah.
Or
Or
yeah,
just the first Thor
or
movie,
just the first Thor movie.
even. Like, after
That would have
being,
been a good time. Yeah.
after, after family betrayal,
Yeah, that's a great time to talk to them.
not only
So,
family betrayal, but, oh yeah, my brother's actually adopted
oh
uh, from
yeah,
from our
man, there's
sworn
so many
enemy.
secrets in that family.
Like, right.
So,
And yeah,
so I think you mentioned a few shoulds, and I'm going to highlight them because most everyone has those.
right.
And I like to stay away from should,
Okay.
because it's a way of phrasing things where we automatically pile on some shame or guilt onto ourselves. Oh, look, there's the thing that needs to happen, and if we don't do it, then shame on us.
Oh,
And
that's a good
so,
point.
yeah, so
That's a
I
very
I
good
like
point.
to think of it more as where might have been helpful. It's a very subtle change in how you talk about things, but especially when it comes to, like I was talking about, something so difficult to
Hmm.
do. Yeah, it could have been good for him to talk to someone then. Necessary? Not necessarily. But it could have preemptively helped him sort his way through some things. Um, yeah, earlier on, when it's more the family stuff going on, that would be a good time for like some individual therapy, or maybe some family counseling, or some sort of maybe like a peer specialist, someone who, maybe there's a fellow god who can, really connect with all of this family drama going on. But at that point, you're not really seeing mental health stuff going on, but you're seeing some stuff that he's struggling with. So, yeah, that could have been a really good point for him to talk to someone. Down the road, things definitely start building,
Yeah.
and you see this difference between, okay, so now we're heading toward like potential diagnoses. Like when we talk end game, I really do think that he might have major depressive
Oh yeah,
disorder. Uh,
absolutely. I would
that's how they're playing it out.
absolutely. Well, I say absolutely not as someone who can diagnose it, but as someone who's been
Yeah,
very,
yeah.
very has gone through that. I can
You
say,
related, right?
I
You
could
see
say,
all.
yep,
Yeah.
That's what
It's
was going on.
it's
Yeah.
so interesting because so here's what they did right. What they did right was they showed you somebody. He didn't go into his inner dialogue. He wasn't sitting in therapy or talking to a mental health provider of some sort, like talking about things. No, you actually saw what happened. You saw people reacting around him, um, acting a little bit differently when his name was coming up, pulling him to the side for things. The desperation you could see in him at certain points when he really wanted to help, but he wasn't up to the task at that time. There's a lot of things that even though, no one was sitting down with him and going through the checklist, yeah, it's easy to spot. Like there's some depression stuff going on. And there's a difference between sad and depressed.
Hmm.
So sad, I have this feeling, and yes, it could be hard to get through, and I might withdraw from people from a time or deal with things, but it's not causing it's not as long. So with major depressive disorder, it lasts at least 2 weeks, and you have to have a certain amount of difficulties happening all at one time that are causing you a lot of distress and trouble in life.
Right.
And so they made it very clear that this is more than just he's sad and he's working through it. No, he was stuck.
Hmm. Yeah.
So at that point, plus he was using alcohol to try and help him through it, which happens for a
Hmm.
lot of people too. So at that point, because there were more issues happening, there were a lot more things that potentially might be helpful. So, I mean, he could talk to a medication provider. He could talk to someone who can prescribe medications. There are medications for depression. He could still do therapy of some sort. That can be really great for depression and for alcohol as well. He could go to a treatment program if it was really that bad and he wanted to go somewhere and get some really intensive work done. He could go to Alcoholics Anonymous or some other support group kind of stuff. There's all sorts of things that could be helpful, and it's not that he needs all of those things all at once at that
Hmm.
point. It's just that because he has more going on, it's like, okay, well, we can look at trying to adjust your brain chemistry. We can help you try and look at things a little bit of a
Okay.
different way. We can give you those support people that you seem to be lacking. But yeah, as time goes on, things definitely weigh him down more and more.
And here's something else that I've always thought was interesting, and it's still, I feel very much something that's like you see it and it still bothers me. Um, he goes through all of that,
Yep.
and it seems like there's still this relation to, oh, people that are in shape and ripped are happy individuals.
I know, right? Why don't we think that?
They still do that. And the thing, and honestly, and I would like to think like, oh, that's just for movie purposes. But I remember, I can't even remember but like where I saw it, but I've seen it a couple times where people will say, hey, maybe you don't have a mental health issue. Maybe you should just go outside and walk around in nature and go on a hike. And it's one of those things that's always bothered me because I'm like, those things are great.
Yep.
And those things can certainly bring temporary relief, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But going on a hike isn't going to get at the root issue. Is
And
it?
so,
And this is me
yes,
asking a
yeah,
question. This is
it's a
me
great
asking you a
question.
question.
So there are many routes to mental health, to well-being, to quality of life, and so being outside, being connected to nature is important. There's growing research in that. Most cultures have some sort of connection to nature piece. So there's something there. There's also a lot of research going on about the gut and diet. And there's actually some cool research that came out recently that a keto diet might actually be helpful for schizophrenia. Who knew? Super
Wow.
cool, right? So exercise, and I'm not talking going to the gym. I mean, keeping your body active. getting fresh air, connecting to nature, being aware of what you're putting in your body, trying to get rid of all the like weird extra chemicals that we've added to all of our foods and stuff over the past like 50 years or whatever. All of that stuff does seem to be good for us. And yoga, spiritual thing. I mean, like the list goes on. All of these things are extremely helpful. Some people might hone in on one of these other facets, and a part of it is much more impactful for them, and they don't necessarily need therapy, or they don't need mental health medications, or other types of treatment. For some people, though, they do, and there are many routes to success. There are
Right.
many routes to that outcome, and one strong belief I have is that if you pick one thing, it's not going to work.
Okay.
So let's say you're the perfect mental health client or patient. You do all the things everybody tells you to do. Let's say you've got a psychiatrist, they give you meds, you take them exactly how you're supposed to. You go to a therapist, you attend all the time, you da da da, you do all these things, but you have no friends, and you eat junk all the time, and you are only in bed. Now, arguably, these things go against a bit of what you'd be working on in therapy,
Right.
but I'm going to an extreme here because um, if you only have one thing that's helping you, it's usually not enough. Our bodies and our minds are more complicated than that. So that's all to say, those other things are super important. And you're also hitting the nail on the head that for some people, it's not necessarily going to get at an underlying thing. So, getting into nature for some people, it helps them get connected. It helps them rewire their brain. It helps them reframe or refocus how they think about things.
Hmm.
For other people, it's not. And so, um, for some people, they can use religion or spirituality and it helps them get there. Others, it doesn't. There are all sorts of ways that you can try and maneuver your mind and your body where you need it to go, and therapy is one of those ways, and medications are some of those ways where you can help your brain and your body along. So yeah, sometimes some people really do get a lot from being able to work on those underlying causes like you're talking about, through those treatments. But there's more than one route for most anything.
And it's just it is very I do like that you say that there's so many different routes, because I feel like there's still such a heavy negative connotation when it comes to medication versus
Mm,
people that are like, well, I just learned to surf. And I'm like, okay, like
that's great for you.
that's great. That's really good for you. It's great that you learned to surf and that you connected with nature. But I feel
Yep.
like there's still, like, if you put that person in a room with the person that got put on medication, I feel like that person still gets looked at in a more positive light than the person
It's
on
the fat
medication,
shaming thing again,
right?
but
And that's okay.
with symptoms and treatment.
You took
Mhm.
it. That's what I'm. Yes, you took
Yeah.
it right out of, like, yeah. It's almost like the fat shaming thing, when in reality these people are still just doing what they can to better themselves. It's
Yes.
just one
It
thing
looks
worked for
different for
them,
different people.
right?
Mhm.
It looks different for different
Absolutely.
people. And with Thor, even when, like, if we go from when Thanos snapped
Okay.
and everyone disappeared, they had this interesting thing where you saw every single Avenger cope in different ways, because it seemed
Mm.
like Rhodey went back to the military.
Yep.
It seemed like he
Mhm.
kind of went back to the military. Rocket was on Earth. He was helping. He was helping with something. Captain Marvel, she went back out and she was patrolling the galaxy and just trying to help where she could, because it was all very, very chaotic. Um, but the thing that I did notice, all of them outside of a Hawkeye and his murder spree, which doesn't get talked about nearly enough.
No.
um, but outside of Hawkeye and his murder spree, everyone else just went back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Captain America never really stopped being Captain America. He kept on like, hey, what can I do? We're
Mm-hmm.
still out here trying to help people. And the big difference is it was one of those things. Thor got hit hard. And when he got hit harder than anyone else did.
Yeah.
Harder than anyone else did. And that was his breaking point. He was like, I did everything I could, right?
Yep.
When you hold open a star in order to get your new weapon, like,
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
right? You have one eye. You had to fight your brother and your sister
Mm-hmm.
multiple times, right?
Yeah.
You he's at his he's done. He's done. He fought dark elves. He fought his sister. He he's
And so,
completely drained, and they keep asking more of him, and he keeps
and
taking losses.
well, and he wants to do more. He desperately wants to essentially undo the failure, the mistake. Um, be able to fix everything. But what's interesting to me though too is they do show everyone else. And so, okay, obviously the way he was feeling was so clear how much he was suffering. Tony Stark had a great life and he was afraid to lose it.
Right.
I would argue Natasha, for example, or Captain America, or some of these folks. What's interesting though is we see what they did as healthy, not necessarily because it was, but because it turned out okay. Because think about this. So
Okay.
they didn't give up. They didn't give up. They didn't give up. They kept going. They kept trying. They kept doing. Do you know what was really close to happening? The entire world, the entire universe, multiverse, etc. Thanos said, I realize you guys aren't going to give up, so I'm going to start it brand new.
Can we talk about
So,
what an
okay.
evil guy?
I know, right?
I
So
hate your
here's
resilience. This sickens me.
so here's the argument though. So resilience a lot of times we see as there is this post-traumatic growth that you are able to move through and beyond the terrible things that have happened. I would argue they might not be as resilient as they look at on the outside because okay, they succeeded, great. But I got to tell you, there are a lot of people out there that fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and fight and they cannot stand the idea of stopping and essentially trying to find a way through it. Essentially Thor, they're afraid of what it would be like to feel like Thor, to stop. And so they keep going and they keep going even though it's almost like a literal concrete wall in front of them that they're beating their head against. They're using up all their time and energy, resources, everything on this thing, and all they're doing is breaking themselves down.
Yeah.
Or in this case, honestly, it was one in 15,000 million. I don't know, something ridiculous, right? Doctor Strange is like one. There's a one. And
I call
so,
BS on his math also, but
right?
more
I
on
thought
that
that was
later.
interesting. I agree with you there.
Yeah.
I thought that was weird. Whatever, movies. But um, I think they appear healthier on the outside than they actually are because they almost destroyed what they had left
Mm-hmm.
because they could not let go. And so I would argue that that's not necessarily resilience. Now, I'm not saying Thor was resilient or Hawkeye for that matter. Um, but they had different problems. And it worked out for them, which is great. But there are a lot of times in life where it doesn't work out. And you can keep trying to push forward on something that's not working, and it feels like you're doing something when you're just on a treadmill essentially.
Hmm.
Versus Thor, who said, I'm getting off the treadmill. And he hadn't worked his way through it by any means. But yeah, I think there probably was some judgment there. And their mental health has a similar thing to weight, where people say, "Hey, it's our mind." You, first off, it's probably more complicated than that, but it's your mind. Just decide.
Hmm.
Just do the thing. Just make the change. Go surfing. Do whatever. And it's not that simple. And what works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. And here's what I'll say though is I really respect the people who they know what worked for them, and when they support someone else, they don't say here's what works. They say what works for you is going to depend on you. I can tell you about what worked for me, but yours is going to look different.
Hmm.
Because we don't want to end up shaming the person where surfing worked. Well, no, like that's awesome. But we want to make sure everybody can find the thing that helps. And you're right. There can be a lot of stigma or judgment around getting help from the outside or medications, even though oddly enough we don't always judge. We'll be like, yeah, I could see why someone would start drinking if this happened. Yeah, I could see why someone might start taking some mental health medication
Oh
because of what
gosh, I
happened,
never even
right?
thought about it that way. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Like how many
Yeah.
times? Yeah, how many times is it like after a bad day? It's like, ugh, I need a drink, and it's
Oh,
like,
I
do
need a
you?
drink. Oh, I need my antidepressant right now,
Right?
right? Like
Right?
so
Do
it's
you? Like,
interesting
yeah.
how we work certain things like, oh, that one's okay, but this other thing, no, not so much. When really the medication's probably going to give him a better outcome if he did it.
So let me ask you a question. I wanted to backtrack just a little bit about
Mm,
your piece on resilience.
yeah.
Because, like you said, it worked out well with the Avengers and what they were doing, and they're being resilient. In that case, it was like it was definitely a good thing, like keep trying to bring back.
Well, they were persevering.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Surviving, right?
Yeah.
And I get so I just want to make sure I understand with your resilience piece, you're saying sometimes you're in situations where you shouldn't be resilient. You should actually kind of be trying to back away, right? Like in the like
So
is
resilience is being able to come back,
right.
being able to grow, to move through, to move forward. Um, and I mean, I guess you could I would say on the outside they looked like they were moving forward. And maybe to a certain degree they were before Ant-Man came back.
Right.
So to be fair, I'm not fully remembering all of those details before Ant-Man came back.
So before
But I
Ant-Man
believe
came
that
back,
they were trying still, right, to figure out how to bring everybody back.
well, they it wasn't that they were trying to figure out how to bring everybody back. They were pretty much just trying to keep the world stable because when
Okay, okay,
yeah, that's why yeah, that and so it was they were actually like at the time it was like, "Oh, the stones are gone, so there's
yeah.
nothing that we can do." And so we're
I
just trying to keep the world government stable and the
Yep.
world standing up with half the population being gone.
I would
Yeah.
argue that Captain America potentially resilient, right? He's doing the support groups, he's trying
Mhm.
to help. He's gone through this kind of thing before. He lost everybody by being frozen in ice, and then poof, here you are, new
Good point.
people.
Right.
So he had already had to work through this a bit, low key on his own. And so there were signs that there is some resiliency going on with him. Natasha,
Mhm.
Black Widow, I think there are things to hint that she's not quite as resilient. She tends to be withdrawn a bit. She was kind of hinting at not eating well. Her
She kind of got lost in work
She got lost in work, and when she had those quiet moments, you could tell something was unsettled with
Right.
her. And Captain America was trying to reach her, and she kind of batted it away in the way that she's
Right.
great at. And so with her, she's feeling more like I'm working through something by doing can look very similar to working to try and distract. And yeah, I just feel like she might have been struggling a little bit less able to be resilient with everything as Captain America, even though they were doing very similar things together. But they don't show you too terribly much there. But yeah, the thing is that there are certain things that can look resilient that aren't necessarily, but they look good on the outside. And so we say, well, oh, well, you know, look how much of a better person they are than someone else, when everybody's struggling, everyone's trying to find a way through. um Thor actually in the end ends up really resilient. If you think about it, it just took him longer than those 5 years. I
Right.
mean, he ends up bigger and badder than ever. He has to do some more soul searching, but he actually searches.
Right.
He is trying to figure himself out.
Right.
He shifts to that next stage. And so I think that's the biggest important piece is there can be this misunderstanding that, oh, look, Thor wasn't resilient, these other people were. Well, no, the other people were struggling. It was just more subtle. And he was actually really resistant. He was actually really resilient. You just had to look further out. You had to step back
Yes.
further and look at his larger picture. And he probably sprang back stronger than anybody.
That's a very, very, yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, he definitely did have a bounce back, and I even though I didn't like how they handled his
Mm.
loss, I like that he did get a comeback, and I really like that he kind of got some closure. Like when he got a chance to go back and talk to his mom, he was able to
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
get,
I loved that.
yeah, he was able to get some closure. I definitely teared up at that part.
That was
Um,
so good. And
yeah,
you just saw what a wonderful mother she
yeah,
was. And just in that short little snippet.
yeah. You
Yeah.
did, and yeah, and so she immediately picked up on what was going on,
Mhm.
which honestly is it that moment when I rewatched it recently,
Mm.
it was a mother and son moment, but it did feel like almost like a therapy appointment. It did because it was one
She
of
hit on
those
some
things
good
where
stuff.
she
Mhm.
really did. She touched on some
Yep.
really good things as well as being being able to read people
Mm.
is a superpower. And everybody can't do it. And some people are really, really bad at it.
Yeah.
And she was able to kind of see the hurt that he
Yes.
was so clearly holding. She was
Yep.
able to pick up on it. And that's something that I feel like a lot of mental health professionals are able to do. Y'all are
Mm.
very capable. And it could even just be a class that you have to take at some point. But you're very, very good at reading people and seeing through people, and not even necessarily seeing through people, but seeing the real issue once you get their story. And
That's key.
yeah,
Yep.
once you get their
Mhm.
story, and she knew enough about her son before this schism because they had gone back in time. She knew enough about her son before to know you are my son,
Yep.
but something happened to you.
Yep. Yeah, and you hit on a really good point. So people have different levels of emotional intelligence. People have different levels of being able to empathize, being able to communicate that empathy, being able to just observe and see what might be going on with someone and support someone in that. some people have natural abilities in that, and they are more prone to go into those kinds of fields. It makes sense, you know. Um, we do also get trained. We get trained in trying to hone those skills of paying attention for patterns, paying attention to not just what someone says, but how they say it, and what their body language is, what their facial expressions are. How much do those things, how much do those things come together and make sense versus do some of those things seem off from one another? So, for example, how a person says that they're feeling could be different than how it's expressed or how they look on the outside. And so, all of these things, yeah, they do get honed, and how you respond to them, and how you can help guide someone to where they need to go. But yeah, I definitely agree. She was hitting on some really great things for him. Failure's a big, big, big one for him. He is, once again, he's a warrior. He did a lot of things right, but he had one big thing that went wrong. And he's struggling in a lot of ways. Yeah, I I have to say that going back looking at it, I actually really love his story. I love what they did with Thor. I don't I don't love that he was fat shamed. I don't love that he didn't get what he needed along the way. It hurts to see just he gets hit one after the other after the other. I was actually fast forwarding to hit Thor parts in the earlier movies to go through, and
It hurt that much more.
it hurt that much
It
more.
hurt
You
that
just
much,
were
just
like,
like,
"Oh my
sheesh.
god." Yeah, it just
Yeah.
hits you so much harder when it's like duk, 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 duk. And so I hurt for him, and at the same time, I really appreciated them showing such a human side to this god.
Hmm.
And so we were talking about the shaming. I You need to see that this happens to anyone. He doesn't control his genetics, his biology. He doesn't control the things that happen to him. um yes, there are things that he might have done differently in certain places, and he might have struggled less. And at the same time, even as a god, he's not perfect, and even as a god, he can't do everything the exact way that's going to turn out best. And so he's doing the best he can, and you're along for the ride with him, and you get to see him come out of it. And 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 he's not just a god either. He's the goofy one. He's also, and that's probably part of why they shamed him too. They made all these jokes because he's the silly, he's the blonde, he's the goofball, he's the one that's always off kilter. So they don't really see how much he's hurting. So they showed that even the person who is the laugher and the jokester and can, let everything roll off their back, even they can really be hurting. Even the strong, godlike person, like you said, even the one with muscles can be really hurting. And I love that they showed that. And his progression through it to show that him being willing to struggle and find his way through it, that's resilience, that's strength, and he's a stronger god than he was at the start because of it.
I like that.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.